Okay, I discussed it slightly in the beginning of my last video. Gervonta Tank Davis reportedly in talks for a rematch against Isaac Pitbull Cruz this summer. However, this time around, it being at £140. And I think it's rather significant because there's a certain Shakur Stevenson now reigning as one of 4 world champions in the junior welterweight division. Look, we've heard talks around Shakur Stevenson, Gervonta Davis for years. Back then, it being at £135. I think the narrative's completely different now because Shakur Stevenson has now risen. You know, I think he is now universally recognised as being one of the best boxers, pound for pound, on the planet. He's more known to the casuals now. And when you talk about Gervonta Tank Davis, even when the news was dropped last night about him being in talks for a rematch between him and Pitbull Cruz, you just scroll through TikTok and the amount of edits that are coming out, he still has a massive, massive fan base despite all of the mess that has taken place outside the ring in recent months. And in my opinion, look, I've always felt like Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua is the biggest fight in boxing. I don't think it is now. And I do think it's now reached the point where it has massively dropped. And so when you look at Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Davis, right now, it's certainly the biggest fight in USA boxing. It might be the biggest fight in boxing overall. But listen, look, I'll get into that in a minute. First, I want to quickly touch on Oleksandr Usyk, who's come out and he's revealed his 3-man hit list before he wants to hang up the gloves. I think, obviously, we know about Rico Verhoeven taking place May 23rd at the Pyramids of Giza. He's then named the winner of Daniel Dubois. Fabio Wardley wants to fight the winner of that fight, which, look, if it's Fabio Wardley, that's a massive fight. That's a fight that all of us would be very happy with. And then the third fight being a trilogy against Tyson Fury, which I don't really think many people are that happy with. Me, personally, if he has that fight against Wardley, obviously, if Wardley gets the job done against Daniel Dubois, I think you can kind of say, okay, fair enough. For the people wondering and asking why he would want that trilogy fight against Tyson Fury, look, let me just tell you plain and simply. That is the money fight. It's Tyson Fury, a trilogy fight against Tyson Fury as your final fight before walking away from the sport of boxing. Of course he's going to want to do that. Look, that 3-man hit list, in my opinion, I see it as very flaky. Look, it doesn't mean it's certainly going to be those names for his final 3 fights. We don't know what's going to happen between Daniel Dubois and Fabio Wardley. That is a genuine 50-50 fight. And if Daniel Dubois wins that fight, no one's going to be interested in seeing that fight. I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't be surprised if Oleksandr Usyk wasn't interested in that fight. I don't know why he would be interested in that fight, unless Daniel Dubois goes in there and really puts on a destructive performance against Fabio Wardley, which I don't know if I can see happening. To be fair, I don't even know if Daniel Dubois would be that interested. Look, obviously he would, because it's another opportunity to win a world title, multiple world titles. But at the end of the day, watch what happened in the first 2 fights. He got stopped both times. You know, very convincingly. I think he knows deep down in his heart he can't beat Oleksandr Usyk. Look, some people might argue the age factor. The age factor was in play in their last fight, and look what happened. I don't really think much would have changed between then and now, or then and whenever that fight would take place if obviously Dubois beats Fabio Wardley. The comparison with the Tyson Fury trilogy, it's slightly different because Tyson Fury went all 24 rounds. It was a lot more competitive. Tyson Fury brings a lot more eyeballs, a lot more attention. He is better than Daniel Dubois, isn't he? By the time they would have that fight, him being third down on that 3-man hit list, Usyk would be around 39 years old or so. We, again, don't know where Tyson Fury will be then. Obviously, he's got that fight against Makhmudov. He'll probably have another one before that trilogy against Oleksandr Usyk. But you would say that he would have a slight advantage in comparison to his first 2 fights, obviously, because Oleksandr Usyk will be a little bit older. But I want to quickly touch on Agit Kabayel, because literally while I'm recording, it's just come out a quote from Agit Kabayel saying, "My parents always told me to stay humble and respectful, but I can't accept being ignored any longer. I deserve the title shot." Most people, in fact 99% of boxing fans, are going to be in the same train of thought right now, saying, why on God's green earth is Agit Kabayel not one of 3 options for Oleksandr Usyk before he ends up pulling it quits and walking away from the sport of boxing? He should be. You know, him and Fabio Wardley are neck and neck for most deserving of the opportunity to fight Oleksandr Usyk. Baffling as to why he is not on there. You know, if it was up to me, which obviously it's not, if it was up to me, the 3-man hit list that I would give Oleksandr Usyk would be Kabayel, Fabio Wardley, and then a fight against either Deontay Wilder, someone from his generation, Oleksandr Usyk's generation, or Moses Satauma, someone coming through for the new generation. But most certainly, Agit Kabayel has got to be on that list. Look, I would be extremely frustrated if I was Kabayel, but at the same time, the reality is it doesn't look like you're getting that fight. And right now, he looks kind of lost in no man's land because all of his competitives, all the notable names in the heavyweight division seemingly are involved in fights coming up. You know, the heavyweight division looks to be very active right now, and Kabayel's just kind of sat there waiting, you know, beyond the wayside, just waiting for the opportunity to fight Usyk. I just don't think he's going to get that. Clearly. The only way I can see that happening is if Dubois goes and beats Fabio Wardley, because I just don't really think the fans are going to accept a trilogy fight between Daniel Dubois and Oleksandr Usyk, which would then open up the obvious candidate being Kabayel. Do I think Usyk's ducking Kabayel? Do I think he's scared or nervous about Kabayel? No. I do think Usyk's intelligent enough to know what his strengths are, know what his weaknesses are, both his and Kabayel's, and we know Kabayel's bodywork and relentless pushing forward style can be, you know, the way he chops down that tree in every single fight, you know, that would cause some trouble to Oleksandr Usyk, who likes to move consistently, is not great when hitting the body. We all know that is his weakness, that is his kryptonite, but I don't think he's scared. Listen, look, it still might end up happening. Like I said before, this 3-man hit list is very flaky. Things could adjust, things could change. But anyways, let's get into the main part of the video. Gervonta Tank Davis coming back to have a rematch against Isaac Pitbull Cruz. I'm not that mad at it. I know some people are not that keen on seeing a rematch because a lot of people want to see a rematch against Lamont Roach. Obviously, we've not seen Tank in the ring since that first fight against Lamont Roach, which he should have lost. Let's be honest, it was a controversial draw. Should have lost that fight. I think they'll end up having that fight. And when you look at Lamont Roach, he had a very close fight against Pitbull Cruz not that long ago anyway. And so for a Gervonta Davis, who we've not seen sharp in the ring since, you know, you could say Frank Martin, yes, but is Frank Martin a worthy enough opponent, with no disrespect, to be able to judge if Gervonta was at his most sharp? Again, he was very sharp against Ryan Garcia, but that was a very weight-drained Ryan Garcia, very dehydrated Ryan Garcia. He certainly was not sharp against Lamont Roach, and Lamont Roach, like I said before, should have won that fight. But I think the main takeaway from him coming back and fighting at 140 pounds is, number one, he's coming back. All we've heard for the past however many months or past however many years is that he's not interested in boxing, and, you know, his enthusiasm and love for the sport has massively dwindled. You know, he was in line to have an exhibition fight against Jake Paul. You know, it was only because of the mess outside the ring that he didn't have that fight, and it was Anthony Joshua who then stepped in and obviously broke Jake Paul's jaw. And so point number two, obviously surround Shakur Stevenson, because if Gervonta is coming back, that is the fight, isn't it? And if he's coming back and going into Shakur Stevenson's division, and I'm going to call it Shakur Stevenson's division, despite him being one of 4 world champions, I do think it is his division. I think all of us can agree on him being one of the very best boxers on the planet, certainly the best at 140 pounds. The other 3 world champions, obviously you've got Gary Antoine Russell. I would not be surprised if, say, Tank goes and beats Isaac Pitbull Cruz. I do kind of feel like that's the obvious world title shot for Tank. You've got Richardson Hitchens. That would be a very interesting fight, although I don't know what's going on with Richardson Hitchens. Is he going to move up? Is he going to move to Zuffa Boxing and abandon his world title belt? I don't know. And then you've obviously got Dalton Smith, who's, you know, just beat Subriel Matias to win the WBC title. And by the way, Dalton Smith, his first defense of his green and gold belt being against Alberto Puello, is absolutely fucking ludicrous, by the way. That's a very hard first defense of your WBC title. Look, if he wins that, then fair fox to Dalton Smith. That's a tough fight. A lot of people would argue this is harder than the Matias fight. So yeah, you've obviously got Shakur Stevenson as the 4th world champion in that division. And look, comparing him to the other names that I've just mentioned, Shakur is the number 1 in that division. And I guess people wondering why I think that now it seems more possible to make that fight in comparison to when they were at 135 pounds. Why does it matter, the fact that Tank's moving up to 140 pounds? Why does that change things? Number one, the fact that he's fighting. You know, before he just seemed very uninterested. Having an exhibition fight against Jake Paul suggests to me, alongside what he was saying to the media about not wanting to box anymore, it's very different. And then the fact that Shakur, you know, he will be welcoming Tank into his division. You know, Tank's moving up to that division. Tank has to prove himself now. And look, the narrative before that Tank was able to spin was that I don't need to fight Shakur Stevenson. He's not a big enough name, or whatever it was. Shakur Stevenson can now call the shots, because he is that guy now. I know, yes, Tank is the bigger name. He's got more star power. He's more known to the casuals, of course. But Shakur Stevenson doesn't need to chase that fight anymore. You know, he doesn't need Tank like he used to need that fight against Tank. He don't need it anymore. And I feel like a lot of boxing fans are now siding a lot more to Shakur Stevenson. And that performance and that win against Teofimo Lopez has done absolute wonders for Shakur Stevenson. In terms of influence, in terms of authority, and being able to pick and decide what he wants to do next. And so things have kind of changed a little bit. You know, when they're both fighting at 135 pounds, and Shakur was consistently coming out calling for the fight against Tank, Tank was not giving the same energy back. You know, when the media would ask him about that fight against Shakur, I'm pretty sure there was a time when he actually asked the media, or told the media, to stop asking him about Shakur Stevenson. You know, sometimes you just have to see the evidence in front of you. And I remember back then as well, weirdly, there were fans coming out, you know, they were Tank fans, coming out saying that Shakur was ducking Tank. What were people on about? Do I think Gervonta Davis was scared of Shakur Stevenson? Do I think he's scared of him now? No. But I do think, after them being in training together, and the high IQ and the understanding of how good each of them are, sometimes you can tell. You know, you look at, say, John Jones in the UFC, you can just tell, you know, when Tom Aspinall is going out and calling them out. There's a reason these guys aren't taking them fights, because it's a massive risk. They know how good that potential opponent is. And now the world have woken up to realise just how good Shakur Stevenson is. And when you talk about a potential fight between Gervonta Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson, the narrative right now and the odds has massively changed in comparison to even a year ago. You know, the amount of support and defence that Gervonta Tank Davis got, I don't think he's got the same anymore. I think people are now really giving Shakur his respect. And look, when you look at the pound for pound rankings, Shakur Stevenson, look how high he's risen. And I would not be surprised within the next 2 years if he's sat at number 1. And I just feel like this is the fight. This is the fight he needs. This is the legacy fight. Yes, Teofimo Lopez, that performance, that fight, that result, absolutely game changer. He's there on Joe Rogan's podcast. You know, Joe Rogan's there waxing lyrical about him to his face. I think everyone now understands and respects Shakur Stevenson. But in terms of legacy fight, you know, to make you the face of boxing, you go and beat Gervonta Tank Davis. That's it. No questions asked anymore. But anyways, if there's any more developments, if Shakur even comes out and makes any comments about Gervonta moving to 140 pounds, we will discuss it there and then. As of right now, go and follow Dictate Boxing on all of the social media platforms. Links are down below as always. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to Dictate Boxing if you're new around here, and we will speak very soon.